Let's get started. So as I mentioned, traditionally, Marlene and I we welcome everybody, and then we talk a little bit about what's coming up with the respective joint chapters. So today, yes, Catherine. Can we go mute? So we are in the middle of July. This is our July meeting. And then for August, I'm going to pass it over to Marlene to talk about a couple of events that are happening in the Bay Area.
Thank you. First of all, welcome. It's good to see everybody this morning. I hope the rest of the folks who registered will be able to join us. Appreciate your time this morning. We've got several events coming up and hope that we'll see some of you at them. On Saturday, August the 9th, we're going to have a meeting at Cypress Lawn Cemetery in South San Francisco at the Lefty O'Doul Monument. You may have noticed in This Week in SABR, Jacob has been sharing a very nicely done announcement of this meeting. John Leonidakis, the documentary filmmaker, is working on a documentary about Lefty. And he also was submitted for and was awarded a SABR grant to get the monument at Lefty's gravesite restored. So with the help of SABR and friends at the Giants, the monument is being restored. And we're going to have a grand unveiling on Saturday, August the 9th at 9:30. And I
Marlene Vogelsong.
Yes.
I've been talking. Marianne. It's probably Ryan's mom or something.
Oh. Okay. Larry, can you put yourself, was that you? Thank you. So you're all invited, your friends are invited, it's free, it's open to the public. We're hoping that some of the fellows from the San Francisco Old Timers will be able to join us. So we're going to meet at Lefty's gravesite at about 9:30. There'll be a little ceremony there. If you'd like to say something about Lefty, if you ever saw him or you went to the restaurant or you have a story, John is going to invite people to share and perhaps and do some more filming for the documentary. And then after that, we're going to go across the street and down the road, I believe, to Malloy's Tavern, and we're going to continue our celebration of Lefty there. So hope that you can all attend that. And I will be sending out more announcements for that, probably with a little bit of an RSVP to me or John. I'm going to bring a birthday cake, so I want to know what size to get. And then on Sunday, August the 24th, we're going to have our second annual Dusty Baker Lefty O'Doul Japan Ball meetup at the Ballers game in Oakland. Steve Murphy has been working on that, and he sent out an email earlier this week with a link to a site so we could get discounted tickets and sit together in the same section. So please keep an eye open for that. That's going to be fun. We had a good time last year. And then towards the end of September 19th through 21st, is the Women in Baseball virtual conference that's sponsored by IWBC and SABR. And it's always a very interesting 2.5 days learning about what women have been doing and the roles that they are playing in baseball. This year, the theme is Women Beyond the Diamond. So we're looking at scorekeepers and groundskeepers and people who keep the diamond sparkling, if you will. So again, I hope you can join us for some of those events. Thanks to those of you the authors who get in touch with us and let us know that you've got something written and you're ready to talk about it. We really appreciate your wanting to be involved with us. So thanks everybody for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marlene. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Yes. Yeah, my phone seems to think that I'm driving, which I'm not. So a couple of events, as you heard, in August. For September, we are planning our annual trip to Little Fenway, which if you've been there, you know how awesome it is. If you haven't been there, it is a property owned by one of our members. and it contains a museum of baseball memorabilia, as well as a 1/4 inch replica of Fenway Park. So we typically have a little bit of a show and tell. We bring some books, we do a raffle, we'll have a couple speakers, we take a look at the materials that are available in the memorabilia museum, and then we typically play some wiffle ball, whomever it is. That is tentatively September, and we'll send some more information soon. It is a free event. However, we typically request that a donation be provided to a case that's near and dear to the heart of our member, and we'll include that all in the email. So that is that. Originally, I proposed an outing to a Lincoln Potters game, and that would have been for tomorrow's game. I'm out of town, so I won't be going. But we only had one other interested party. So if you think that would be something that you'd be interested in, let me know, because there are still a couple of game stands left, or home stands, I should say. And that is it that I have for now. Anything that you think I missed, Marlene, or anybody else?
If we have time at the end of our meeting, maybe we could chat with folks who went to the SABR convention and get their reactions to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the Lefty dual statue renovation, that was part of a local grant from
Right.
SABR, right?
Right.
Yes. If anybody has ideas on other activities that could be done, certainly don't be shy. The local chapters program is something that is meant to really bring that local, vibrant memory of baseball alive for students, and for, well, not just for students of the game, but for folks who might have been privy to something in history and now they're no longer there, or anything along those lines. So if you have other ideas for those, I highly encourage that you talk to Marlene, talk to myself. We can give you a little bit of hint, and we can properly position it for consideration.
Thank you. That's a good reminder.
All righty. So with that, I am going to take a look at who else is on the waiting room. So bear with me. I don't think I have anybody else. Let's see, we do have one, Patrick. Welcome, Pat. And with that, we're going to pass it to the first of our three speakers. So we have Noel Hynd, then we have Dennis Snelling, and then we have Rob Elias. So Noel, I'm going to pass it to you. Go ahead and unmute, and you can start sharing your content.
Hi, I just unmuted myself. Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
We sure
Very
can.
good. So, to be blunt, is it safe to start? I think it is, yes?
It is. It is.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, we're going to do some time traveling today. I'm going to tell you about who, in my opinion, was the greatest Brooklyn Dodger that nobody has ever heard of. A fellow named Otto Miller, who spent much of his just about all of his adult life in Brooklyn or in a Dodger uniform. When I was writing 4 other baseball books, I kept coming across his name, Otto Miller. He was in a lot of interesting games, a lot of interesting situations, saw a lot of Dodger history. I'm going to use the word Dodger, even though Otto started in the dead ball era, and the team, as you probably know, the folks in this room would know, that the Dodgers were the Superbas, the Bridegrooms, later on the Robins. I'm just going to use the word Dodger because it rolls off the tongue so easily. Anyway, Otto was a Brooklyn Dodger for 24 years, and I had never heard of him. And I grew up in the New York area, so I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? I decided to find out who he was. here he is now. That's a picture of him around, I guess, around 1931, when he was a coach for the Dodgers in Brooklyn. He's a big, amiable, gracious, hardworking guy, a real working man. It was very, very hard to put his entire life, which he spent all of his adult life in baseball. It was hard to put that into 300 pages. It's even harder to put it into 25 minutes, but we're going to give it a try right now.
No, you're not yet sharing your screen. Just FYI.
I'm sorry.
You're not yet sharing your screen.
I'm seeing it.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay.
I'm
Yeah.
on scene. It tells me that I'm sharing the screen.
Oh, yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, my phone has
It's your telephone.
Yep. Okay, we're good.
Okay, you should be seeing a picture of Benjamin Harrison right now, which is probably the only time you'll ever see one.
Yeah, indeed.
Oh my.
Yes?
Yes.
Is that what you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so Otto Miller, who was the name on his birth certificate was Lowell Otto Miller, but as he grew up, he thought Lowell sounded, quote, sissified, unquote. So he dropped it and became Otto Miller when he went into baseball. He was born so long ago in Nebraska that if you had gone any farther west, you would have run into what used to be called hostile Indians. The frontier was just open. He was a big kid, strong, tough, and amiable. He played sandlot baseball by age 20 in 1909. He signed a Class D contract with the Duluth, Minnesota White Sox. On the left on your screen, assuming you can see your screen, the earliest picture of him in anything resembling a professional baseball attire. That's a warm-up jacket, I guess, for the Duluth White Sox. Again, we're going back about 115 years to start our story. At the time, this guy was the catcher for Brooklyn. That's Bill Bergen. SABR people love Bill Bergen because he's the answer to the question of who had the lifetime lowest batting average of anybody who ever played. And it's this guy. By the way, Joey Gallo has been giving him a run for the money in the last few years. Bergen hit 170, but he was a remarkably gifted defensive catcher. He could make lightning throws to second base, first base, get out and field bunts. You have to remember that when Miller came along and when Bergen was the catcher for Brooklyn, catching was a very, very defensive position. All you had to do was have a pulse to get into the batting box. Your job was really to control the game defensively from behind the plate. Charlie Ebbets wanted more offense out of the position, though, as years went on. And Otto had a good training camp in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and was brought up in 1910. I've got some obliteration on the top of my screen as a third string and bullpen coach. If you can see my cursor, you can see this is the Brooklyn squad that came north when Otto was 20 years old, 1910. And this is Otto down here in the front of the first row, if you can follow my cursor. Over here, Bill Dolan, one of the nastiest people to ever play the game, who was the Brooklyn manager at the time. Dolan was so-so on keeping Miller with the team, but his pitching staff talked him into it because Miller was very, very gifted about blocking what would have been wild pitches with scuff balls and shine balls dancing along in the dirt in front of the plate and at the catcher's feet. Otto hit only 167 in 1910, but in 1911, which is the date of this picture, he hit 210. Bill Bergen hit 132 in 1911, which sealed Bergen's fate. Brooklyn sold him to Newark, bye-bye Bergen, and like a lot of people of the era, shipped off to the minor leagues. He played a few more years in the minors, never but got back to the majors again. Dolan announced that Otto would be the starting catcher in 1912. Miller was outstanding at calling a game and handling the trick pitches like spitters and scuff balls. So Otto had the job when the team came north from Arkansas in March of 1912. Here's how it looked. Nice restored photograph. You can see Miller here, and you can see that he hung on closely. Again, follow my cursor if you can, to his catching gear. Notice the other players weren't so protective of their gloves, but the catching mitt was something special. Next to him was the fellow named Tex Irwin, who was a career national leaguer, who was sharing catching responsibilities with Miller that year. If you look around over here, this is Zach Wheat, who was only a year or so older than Miller and was recruited by the same scout, Larry Sutton, who worked for Charlie Ebbets. 1913, the Ebbets Field started off. That's a somewhat idealized picture on the left, but Miller, this was something that remained preeminent in Miller's life for as long as he lived. Miller was the opening day catcher, something that will come up again toward the end of my presentation today. He obviously caught the first pitch that was ever thrown during a game in Ebbets Field. This is a more realistic picture of what Ebbets looked like on opening day. And this is obviously not opening day, because opening day, the weather was horrible. This is a summer day. But if you looked around the stands that opening season, you would see scenes like this. And from deep left field, notice people had to stand. They're behind a fence. There's a partition here. These are obviously the cheaper seats, more expensive as you move in. Notice it's just one deck out here. Eventually, of course, for those who really remember Ebbets, the foul line came right along the railing of the extreme left field corner. So balls could be in play and yet at the top of the fence also. Otto's teammates included Zach Wheat, Knapp Rucker, and Jake Talbert. Plus, in 1913, an exciting rookie named Charles Casey Stengel. Casey came up in September of 1913 and quickly became one of Otto's best friends. Going back to Casey for a second, one reason they became such good friends is they were both Midwestern guys. And Casey from Kansas City and Otto from Nebraska, they kind of bonded. Casey, just to get away from Otto for a second, was always a character. He really did wear sunglasses out there in the outfield, but Brooklyn finished 7th again in 1912 before Casey got there. But in 1913, things started to change. And also in 1913, as Otto Miller got more playing time, he became a favorite of the local fans. He could field and hit. Otto hit 272 in 1913, third highest on the team, and Brooklyn rose to 6th place in 1913, third place in 1915. If you notice the sketching on the right-hand side, pictures, sketches, cartoons in newspapers up until this era were pretty much limited to the political pages and the news sections. But a lot of the guys who drew those cartoons loved baseball, so they started doing sketching at their desks, and eventually, very quickly, they started to appear in the sports pages. I have a longer section about that in the book. It's a fascinating journalistic transition. 1915, Brooklyn not only had a winning team, but Otto was a winning guy. He met a Brooklyn girl named Madeline Dowd, and they got married. Casey was the best man. It was covered. It was a surprise. They kept it secret, but it was covered in all of the Brooklyn newspapers. If you look at that clipping that I think is from the Brooklyn Eagle on the left, and just go down to the bottom, the last line, you'll see that Charlie Stengel, who we of course know as Casey, was the best man. This is a player's pass for the 1916 season. Take a look down here where it says admit. Somebody, probably Otto, wrote in the Mrs. They just assumed Mr. would be coming to the game, but Otto added Mrs. to this. That is Otto's actual signature, and that is Charlie Ebbett's signature also. But this was the press pass. This was the pass that Mrs. Miller used to join the other wives at Ebbets Field. It should be noted that Brooklyn, for some reason, had the highest attendance of female fans of any team in the majors at the time. It just went on for years that way. I believe that's why Ladies' Day originally started at Ebbets. Anyway, by 1916, Brooklyn was ready. Wilbert Robinson had succeeded Bill Dolan as manager. Rube Marquardt joined the team from the Giants. That's Rube to the left with Robbie. And the press renamed the team the Robins. Veteran catcher Jack Chief Myers came over from the New York Giants to team with Otto behind the plate. Myers doesn't look too happy in this picture, but there he was, because Brooklyn won their first pennant in 1916. Otto is in here somewhere. There's Robbie. I think he is in the back row. There's Casey Stengel under my cursor. In any case, there's Otto in the back row, far left on the detail. They would play the Red Sox in the World Series, who had Babe Ruth, who was at the top of his game. That's a Ruth playing card from Cracker Jack card from 1916. Photographers passed to the series and a actual program. If you have a stack of these in your attic, this one sold for $3,000 at auction in 2023. I'd cash them in if I were you. In the Red Sox won the first game. Game 2 was one of the greatest World Series games ever played. Sherry Smith, here, who you see with Otto Miller before the game, pitched against Babe Ruth at Braves Field in Boston. Braves Field, of course, was used because it had a higher capacity than Fenway. Game 2, as I was saying, was a classic. Ruth pitched brilliantly. Brooklyn had 6 hits. Miller had 1 of them. But Miller figured prominently in one of the game's critical plays. Al Janvin, the Boston second baseman, tried to score on a sac fly in the bottom of the 9th to Hy Myers, the Brooklyn center fielder. Miller, 6 feet, 195, stood his ground as 5'11", 165 Janvin charged and tried to kick the ball out of his hand. This is Janvin being out at the plate earlier in the game. And then this great picture, which John Thorne just published within the last couple of years, is a really great shot of the 1916 series. Janvin coming to the plate. That's Miller standing his ground, hitting the tag on the infielder. If you can see where Janvin's leg is here, as he's coming to the plate, there's not much question that he's trying to kick the ball out of Otto's hands. Footnote over here, the umpire was Bill Dineen, who was one of the great umpires of the day, but he also pitched in the 1903 World Series for the Red Sox. I believe he had like a 12-year career as a player and maybe 17 years of the umpire as an umpire, unless I have it the opposite way. Boston won the game in 14 innings. Both Ruth and Sherry Smith pitched complete games. Brooklyn won Game 3, the first ever World Series game played at Ebbets Field. The Sox went on to win the series 4-1. The 16 team is forgotten in history right now, but we're really one of the great Brooklyn teams, the first great Brooklyn teams of the 20th century. Here we see 4 of Otto's long-term teammates, Jake Daubert, George Cutshaw, Ivy Olson, and Mike Mowry. Jack Coombs, the one game that Brooklyn won was pitched by Jack Coombs, former Philadelphia Athletic. Carl Mays, later to attain infamy with the Yankees, was the loser. This might have been your ticket. $3 for a reserve seat. 1917 was not a good year for Brooklyn. or the world. I think these two pictures say more than I could say. Otto registered for the draft. He registered again for World War II, by the way, but he was married and had a wife and child by that time, and he was not called. I found his draft card. How do you like that? And you can see down here, Lowell Otto Miller signed his full name. Very nice handwriting, by the way, I thought. 1917 saw Brooklyn drop to 7th. Those are a couple of 4 pictures I found online of apparently a Reds game at Brooklyn in 1917. Take a close look over here if you can follow my cursor again. The Brooklyn uniform in 1917 was their patriotic uniform. They dropped the B and added an American flag to the home attire and road attire. Affected by the war and the war's aftermath, Brooklyn had off years in 17, 18, and 19. So let's jump to 1920. And only a few minutes after my presentation starts, Otto is already in his 11th year with the club. You can see him back here with a fellow named Clarence Mitchell, who was a pitcher and occasional position player who will be significant in what follows. Obviously, the two men were pretty friendly. When Mitchell pitched, usually Otto was the catcher. Back in the Fall Classic again, against one of the greatest Cleveland teams ever, which brings us to the most memorable play of Otto Miller's career. Anyone know who the guy below is? Well, I give away the answer right here. Bill Wambsgans, the Indians' second baseman. I think most of you know what's coming, but let's take a close look at it. In 1920, the Brooklyn team was led by Burley Grimes, who continued to throw the legal spitball. Boyley was 23-11. There is Boyley later on with Cincinnati, applying the spit to the ball. He would do that before every pitch, so that the opposition didn't know whether the spitter was coming or not. It was a regular, a dry pitch or a wet pitch. Miller was his regular catcher. Miller absolutely hated catching the spitball. He found it disgusting, as we'll see later. Top hitter on the team was Zach Wheat, bottom here, who hit 328. Center fielder Hy Myers, a very, very good player. Otto hit 289 while playing excellent defense and also having to catch Grimes' spitball. This is Zach Wheat with his Hall of Fame at his Hall of Fame induction, which finally came, I believe, around 1958. The 1920 World Series began at Ebbets Field, continued at League Park in Cleveland. After 4 games, the series was tied 2-2. There's how League Park fit into the neighborhood, very much the way Ebbets Field did. And on your right, you can see how you got to see the game without actually having to go to the trouble of buying a ticket. But today, October 10, was already a day of glory, baseball history. Cleveland led 7-0 going to the 5th inning. The game was all Cleveland, and the crowd of 28,000 had already witnessed the first grand slam and the first home run by a pitcher in the World Series. But Brooklyn began a comeback. 5th inning, I believe, Brooklyn's second baseman Pete Kilduff singled to left. This is Pete that you see here. Otto Miller, batting 8th, as he often did, singled sharply to center field. So now Brooklyn had the makings of a rally, runners on first and second. That on the picture of Otto, by the way, is his first baseball card, or the first significant one, 1916 tobacco card. That brought up Clarence Mitchell, the pitcher. Mitchell, who I told you about, was an outstanding hitter. He posted a 252 batting average as a pitcher and as a position player in the course of his career, drove in 138 runs, 7 home runs, and so on. He was not at the plate to bunt, and Bill Wambsgans sensed that and sensed that he might be able to hit a line drive into center field. So Wambsgans started to cheat towards second base just a step or two. Mitchell swung, hit a line drive slightly to the right of second base. Kilduff and Miller looked at the trajectory of the ball, figured it was going into center field, and Wamsgans came over and caught it a few steps away from second base for the first out. Then stepped on second to retire Kilduff, who was at third base. Look at him turning around to see what's going on. That made 2 out. And then Wamsgans confronted a very, very stunned Otto Miller, who you see at the top of the screen on the left, who was a few feet from second, but hadn't seen the catch. Wamsgans smiled at Miller, politely tagged him on the arm, and completed the only unassisted triple play ever in a World Series. In the minor leagues one time, to go off on a brief tangent, a center fielder, it's in my book, a center fielder actually did an unassisted triple play by playing very, very shallow, catching a low line drive, stepping on second and tagging a runner who was off base in the same fashion. Before Game 6, the photographers posed Wamsgans next to his victims, Kilduff, Mitchell, and Miller. Again, Otto doesn't look very happy in this picture, but being a relatively gracious fellow, posed for it anyway. Cleveland won the series 5-3. Otto remained with Brooklyn for the 21 and 22 seasons, though the Brooklyn teams dropped from contention. He remained one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. He had become friends with Babe Ruth, who often came around and joined him at spring training, either in Arkansas or in Florida. This picture is from about 1929, so we're jumping ahead a little with this, but Ruth was often so anxious to get out on the field that he would not bother with a uniform, just jump out of his car, join the friends, and was usually welcomed by the players and certainly the fans. Usually he would end up taking a few at-bats in a game just for the hell of it. Miller received his unconditional release at the end of the 1922 season. It spanned the dead ball era and remained active into the roaring 20s and into the TNT baseball that was ushered in by Ruth. He remains one of the best spitball catchers of all time. But rather than leave baseball, which he loved, he became the playing manager of the Atlanta Crackers in the Southern Association, and in a bizarre interview when he arrived in Atlanta, announced that he was a vegetarian. Who might have known? He moved to Indianapolis, his sort of second hometown, because in his latter boyhood, he went to high school in Indianapolis and played sandlot baseball there. So it was a bit of a homecoming. Playing coach in 1924. And then in 25, returned home, stayed in Brooklyn with his family. He eventually had 4 children, not all of whom survived to adulthood, but he did play for a short time for the famous Brooklyn Bushwicks. That's a Bushwicks cap or a reproduction of one, scorecard, and the plaque that still stands. Dexter Park, home of the Brooklyn Bushwicks, was actually in Queens by about 100 yards or 100 feet, just over the line. 1926, still popular in Brooklyn. He returned to the Dodgers as a pitching and batting coach. He coached under his old friends Wilbur Robinson, who you see in the rocking chair, and Max Carey and Casey Stengel from 34 to 36. He was popular around the league. This is a picture I found on the internet. I recognized Otto immediately. I can equally recognize the Polo Grounds. I think that might be about 1929. He also got to visit as a coach old friends such as Babe Ruth, who was still active in 1935, taking a final 72 at-bats with the Boston Braves. But in the 1930s, the Dodger franchise deteriorated. Stengel was sacked at the end of the 36 season, and his entire coaching staff was fired with him. Otto stayed prominent in New York. He coached informally for St. John's University with baseball players. He signed postcards for friends who came into the bar where that he managed in Flatbush, and he liked to bowl at Farragut Lanes. In retirement, he was frequently a regular at New York baseball events, such as the War Bonds game in 1944, which was a three-way game at the Polo Grounds to raise money for the war effort. All of the coaches were honorary. This is in the center, Bill Clem. I'm circling over here, Hooks Wiltse, who was a pitcher for the early New York Giants of the John McGraw era. Over here on the left, you see Zach Wheat. Far over here, there's our friend Otto completing the Brooklyn coaching staff for the evening. That's what the box score looked like, in case you've never seen a three-way box score. Dodgers 5, Yankees 1, Giants nothing. The big winner, War Bonds of the war effort. When Casey won a pennant for the Yankees in 1949, he arranged to give all of his living teammates from the 1916 Brooklyn club a final bow at a pregame ceremony at Ebbets Field. It was a joyous, bittersweet event as all of these dead ball veterans came together for a final time. These guys were just spoken of as legends, many of them the 1916 team in Brooklyn, and Casey retained a genuine affection for all of his teammates from his first World Series team all of his life. You can see Otto right there. There was one fellow, Gus Getz, I'm circling the name down there at the bottom, who played 1/2 inning for the 1916 team. He was a trainer or assistant trainer, and he had to go in to catch a final inning of a game one time. And the other living members of the team all insisted that he be there. In 1957, when Ebbets Field closed to National League Baseball, Otto was invited to catch the first official game ball, bracketing his experience as the opening day catcher in 1913. This is what a ticket would have looked like, or did look like, and this is what the scoreboard looked like at the end of the game. Even more poignant was the day in 1916 when the park was demolished. Before the wrecking ball took the old place down, Otto presented Roy Campanella with an urn of turf from behind home plate. The two old catchers, who had become friends over the years, commiserated on the spot and posed for pictures. Obviously, you can see Campy is in a wheelchair from his horrible accident in January of 1958, I think it was. Campy played 149 games for Brooklyn. Otto played in 927. No other Brooklyn catcher came anywhere close, and none ever will. A lot of guys are afraid to cry. Otto said as he watched the demolition, "Not me, I'm not ashamed." He stood there and watched as the park came down. Otto Miller died from a fall in April of 1962 in Brooklyn. He was being treated for cataract surgery and apparently stumbled out of a fourth-story window. It was really a horrible ending for a very good and gracious man. He was buried in Goshen, New York. His wife, Madeline, lies beside him to this day. Otto Miller, that was his life story, or the high points and maybe a couple of the low points of it. 1889 to 1962, Brooklyn Dodgers player, 1910, 1922, coach 26 to 36, more than 3,600 games in a Brooklyn uniform, including exhibitions, barnstorming, and games in Cuba, where he managed around in the World War I era. His record will never be broken. When Target, the department store, put out a set of 100 notable Dodgers about 20 years ago, a set of playing cards. They included Otto, which shows you that somebody else noticed the man in his career. There's Ebbets Field, long ago, far away. Some of us still remember the place. I think that's a great picture. It's from the 1920s, a father and a son on their way to the ballpark in an era that those of us who are around today don't even remember. That's the book. I've tried to condense a life into less than half an hour. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your interest.
Thank you. That was very well done.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm halfway through. I thought, God, I hope they can hear me.
But and you were very, very comfortable. It was just kind of like talking to friends, right?
Well, yeah, I think it is not just like the fact that you're sort of a disembodied voice. You sort of sound like my advice from my mom or something that's sort of coming out of nowhere. But I should listen carefully.
I'll take that as a compliment. We all
It's
should
meant
listen
as
to our moms.
it's meant as one. So
Um, we
thank
have
you.
we have a couple of minutes for some questions. If anyone would like to unmute or put it in chat. As you know, Tony's joining us from Puerto Rico, so I think it'll be sort of back and forth with me and him as we go through this. Naveed, hi.
Hi. I saw that in the picture of Casey Stengel with the 1916 alumni that he was in a Yankees uniform at Ebbets Field. Was this a preseason exhibition or something like that?
No, that was the World Series. It was, I think,
Oh,
game 3 of
of
the World
course.
Series. And Casey felt very funny coming back to Ebbets Field wearing a Yankee uniform, and the reaction to him was mixed. But basically, Casey, we all know Casey. He was a guy with a sharp wit. He was often in confrontations with management. So Casey's persona came across, no matter who he was playing for, the fans of Brooklyn always liked Casey. They could give him a hard time sometimes, but don't forget he broke in with the Dodgers. So to some degree, he sort of had a little bit of the Dodger in him.
Thank you. Other questions? What got you interested in Otto? Did you mention that and I have missed it?
The fact that uh, the I'd written a book about the New York Giants called The Giants at the Polo Grounds, and I wrote 2 books. I wrote a book called The Last Game at Ebbets Field, and the more I went through New York baseball
Right.
history, the more I saw Otto Miller's name, and I kept thinking, who is this guy? I mean, as I said, I grew up there, and I remember names like Jake Pittler and other guys who were sort of shall we say, fringe on the team. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but um, really, so many teams. You'd think of teams and great franchises in terms of the stars, but it's the supporting characters who hold the teams together. When those stars go down, somebody's got to step up. And Otto Miller, I realize it was a very, very strange bit of notoriety that you're the answer to the trivia question, who was the third out on the only unassisted triple play in the World Series? But there he was. And to some degree, it was almost typical of Miller. You didn't notice him until something weird happened. And in the book, I go into a lot of crazy stuff that happened to him. He had a great reputation of being an upright guy and a polite guy. And when his wife went through his papers after his death, she found that he'd been suspended by the league a couple times for having fights with opponents under the stands. It was a side of him that he obviously never brought home. And obviously, he was a pretty good guy with his fists, which is why people never fought him. That's almost like a Yogi Berraism. They won't fight with him because he fights too good, something like that. I imagine
That
I imagine he and Yogi probably spent had a few great conversations in their time because
I
they would
imagine
have known each other.
I imagine they did. And thank you. I remember you did say something about this at the beginning of the presentation. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
Um,
right. This is a great example too of for anybody who's interested in writing bios or anything like that. Sometimes the more obscure players are the ones that have the richest stories. So a good way to kind of showcase that baseball books
Yeah,
and more than
yeah,
five.
absolutely the case. If I'm not stepping on you, because I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Um, one time I used to write for Sports Illustrated for a few years in the 1980s, and I had the occasion to talk to two guys who played for Connie Mack, Dib Williams, and you'd recognize the name, but anyway. Um, I'm sorry, trying to place the name and I'm just blanking on it right now. Um, but they told me about how Mr. Scheib would come down and yell at the players for standing on his newly seeded grass, and he wanted them to stand on the dirt. And one of them said, "Oh, Scheib, he was just a cheap bastard." They tell you wonderful stuff. I To go off a slight tangent again, I had the occasion also for Sports Illustrated to talk to Carl Hubble, who pitched to Ruth when not only struck him out in the All-Star game in the 1930s, but pitched to Ruth when Ruth was with the Boston Braves. And Hubble told me how he tried to sneak the same screwball past Ruth in that game, and Ruth was waiting for it, hit it out to a place called the Jury Box in Braves Field, and then glanced at Hubble as he's passing, going from first to second base, and winks as if to say, "See, I remembered what you threw me last time, and I was looking for it." So, yeah, you're right. It's you get some great stories from the stars, but from the supporting casts also.
well, thank you very much for that. Second, coming up is Dennis Snelling,
Yeah.
a local guy, prolific author. I think it's all yours, Dennis.
And no, you can go ahead and unshare, and Dennis, you can go ahead and share.
All right. Let's see. Is that working?
I'm not seeing anything yet.
Let's see. I did.
I'm seeing Noel's.
I did
slide.
share.
Maybe Noel has to take his down.
Okay. Does that?
There we go.
Okay. I had a little change I had to make on it. So let me get back to. I haven't done this way before. Anyway, so the Philadelphia Phillies of 1950 were interesting to me because they're one of three teams I can think of that lost a World Series but are treated almost as if they were champions, and the others being the Impossible Dream Red Sox of 67 and the Go-Go White Sox of 59. And they really became legendary in Philadelphia. And so part of it was understanding why they became that way, and part of it was the Phillies' history, which was often a futility. The book itself covers Philadelphia baseball history back into the 1830s up until when the Phillies were established in 1883. There were several precursor teams that were called the Phillies in the 1870s, but the Phillies came along in 1883. And let's see, I'm having trouble figuring out how to forward this. Okay, let's see, let's go.
Looks like you have it paused. Let me see.
Let's just go back. Let's go on through and I'll start over here. Okay. All right. So these are some of the, am I sharing now?
Not that I personally can see. Let me go ahead and remove the co-host and redo it.
I can see the screen with 8 players on it.
Okay, I've got the buttons now. Does this show the one with the pennant?
No.
Is it a PowerPoint that you were trying to show?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have no settings here. Nothing that I can, there's nothing that shows that I can share.
Do you have 1 or 2 monitors?
Let's see. I mean, it's showing my screen sharing is paused. I don't know how to unpause it.
Can you close PowerPoint and restart it?
Stop share. Okay, is that working?
Screen sharing, it's giving us a message. Yes, we see the five players on top, 5 players.
Okay, all right. And now I have buttons that I can move them forward. Sorry
Yeah.
for that. So the Phillies history, these are some of the major players that were around at the time. The top left is a guy named Charlie Ferguson, who's probably, if Otto Miller is the best Dodgers player or Brooklyn player you've never heard of, Charlie Ferguson's probably the greatest Phillies player you've likely never heard of. He was Ohtani before Ohtani. He was the team's best hitter and best pitcher. Won 30 games one year, pitched a no-hitter, first Phillies no-hitter, opened their new ballpark in 1887, but also was their leading hitter in 1888, led the team in runs batted in and batting average. Unfortunately, he contracted typhoid and died the next year at 24, and nobody really has ever heard of him. He only lasted 4 years. Anyway, these are some of the other players. So you have Ed Delahanty, and then Nat LaJoy. You have Gabby Cravath, Grover Cleveland Alexander, of course. The team photo is the 1915 Phillies, which was their only pennant winner. Delahanty was part of an all 400 hitting outfield in the 1890s for the Phillies. All 3 outfielders hit 400 in the same season, yet the team didn't win. They never had enough pitching. And then they had all sorts of interesting problems over time. They got caught cheating, sending signals. Basically, the third base coach would stand in water with an electric wire that would shock him, giving him a signal to the batter of what the pitch was coming. And they got caught in that. That was in 1900. Bottom is the catcher Bill Killefer, who was Grover Cleveland Alexander's favorite catcher. Then Eparixi, Cy Williams, Lefty O'Doul, who still holds the National League record for hits in a season. He did that in the Phillies uniform in 1929. And Chuck Klein, who was MVP for the Phillies. Their ownership over the years, you have Al Reach and John Rogers at the top left. They founded the team. Horace Fogel, who had an interesting history and got kicked out of baseball in 1913 for claimed he was going to destroy Major League ownership, which never happened. William Baker. And then along the left, you have Gerald and May Nugent, who took over the team after Baker's death. William Cox, who took over the team when the Nugents were forced to sell it because the only way they were keeping going was selling their best players for cash. And so they sold to William Cox, who got kicked out of baseball for gambling. He was one of the people, along with Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe, who were just reinstated from the suspended list. On the right, when Cox was forced to sell after a single season, Bob Carpenter and Herm Pennock, who decided to build the team through building a farm system basically from scratch, starting during the war years. Carpenter was from the DuPont family. His father had married into the DuPont family, but he wasn't interested in working for them and was very interested in sports. Partnered with Connie Mack in a couple of ventures, including minor league basketball and baseball. And Herb Pennant was kind of a family friend, and he brought him over from the Boston Red Sox. I'm going to skip that. So they built the team, and these are two of the foundations of the team. They signed players such as Richie Ashburn, Del Ennis, and Andy Seminick were kind of holdovers from the Cox regime. And then they signed Granny Hamner, shortstop, Willie Jones, the third baseman, several players. But the two real keystones came in 1947 when they signed on the left Curt Simmons to a $65,000 bonus, which at the time was one of the largest in baseball history. And on the right, Robin Roberts out of Michigan State. Roberts lived in Springfield. This is an interesting photo from a newspaper when he was 10. He actually, there was an attempted murder, and rumors were that the gun had been ditched in a field next to the school he attended, and he and his friends went out and found the gun, and here's a picture of him turning it in to the local detective, making the front page of the paper there in Springfield. The other key pitcher was Jim Constanti. He was the first relief pitcher to win a Most Valuable Player award in 1950. They didn't have a Cy Young award at the time. Cy Young was still living. So that was established after his death, I think in 1955. And Constanti on the right is working with his personal pitching coach, who was a neighbor and actually a mortician, and had never played baseball, but was a great bowler, and was talking to Constanti in the late 1940s when his career was hanging by a thread, and talked to him about, hey, you can spin a bowling ball, why can't you spin a baseball? And they came up with some changeup pitches and sinker balls that turned Constanti into a superstar during 1950. He pitched over 160 innings in relief, won 16 games, and was really the glue, because Curt Simmons in 1950 got called into military service when he was leading the major league in wins in 17. And so they really had Roberts and a couple other people. Two of their top rookie pitchers got hurt in September, and so it was really Constanti and Roberts who led them down the stretch. The other dramatic story that's talked about in the book is, of course, the shooting of Eddie Waitkus. He'd been acquired from the Cubs before the 1949 season. What he and nobody else knew is that he's being stalked by a young woman named Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who's pictured at the top left, staring at Eddie's picture on the wall. She was definitely insane and had spent 2 years tracking him down, starting when he was with the Cubs. She lived in Chicago and had planned nearly the entire time to kill him, and got him to come up to her room and shot him. And you can see in the lower left, there he is just after the shooting during his recovery. And then the bottom right is a day they held for him a couple of months after the shooting, but he missed the last half of the 1949 season. And this was part of the basis for the natural, the shooting part of it, for the novel, and of course the movie later. But he made a great comeback in 1950. The Phillies also had new uniforms in 1950. They were designed by manager Eddie Sawyer, and the model for them on the right was Jackie Mayo. And Bob Carpenter's wife was asked what she thought of the new uniforms after Jackie Mayo modeled them, and she said, "That's not fair. Jackie Mayo would look good in anything." This is over a 2-day period. This is a fight that happened. It was Andy Seminick. It started the day before this incident when Eddie Stanky started waving his arms in the air while Seminick was batting. Seminick complained, but the umpire said there's no rule against it. And then Semenuk got hit on the elbow. So by the next day, he wasn't real happy. And so there was a play earlier in the game where he took out Hank Thompson, the Giants' third baseman, in a slide. And so then the next time he came up, Stanky started waving his arms again after they had promised he would stop doing it until there was a ruling from the league office. And so Stanky persisted and got thrown out of the game. Bill Rigney had come in to take Thompson's place at third. He moved over to replace Stanky, and Semenuk, still angry, he was forced out at second. He was out by quite a ways, but went into Rigney anyway and started this brawl. So Rigney got thrown out, so did Semenuk. But Semenuk being thrown out, he took 3/4 of the Giants infield with him by the time he'd left. He got two players thrown out and one player out by injury. This is kind of a little look at the last game of the 1950 series, or of the 1950 season. The Phillies nearly collapsed. They were up 7.5 games with 11 to play in 1950. And the similarities to 1964 when they did collapse are uncanny. They had almost the same size lead in 1964, but they managed to pull it off in the last day of the season. And these are some of the key moments. The top left is the famous throw from Richie Ashburn to nail Cal Abrams at the plate. Stan Lapata is the catcher. Ashburn was not known for having a strong throwing arm. The Dodgers had 2 runners on with no one out, and Duke Snider hit a single to Ashburn, and third baseman Milt Stock sent Abrams home on the play, which Ashburn was pretty upset about, saying it was a pretty routine play. There was nobody out, and he was kind of offended that they sent him. Ashburn made a beautiful throw. There were some things that, Ashburn was playing in, and the Phillies were also shading close to the bag because they thought there might be a bunt play on, and that factored into this. Afterward, Bert Schotten said, Richie Ashburn never threw out anybody. Well, that was an exaggeration. In fact, Ashburn, that was the 5th time Ashburn had thrown a player out at home plate in his career. In fact, a week before, he'd thrown out Eddie Stanky in a game. But that saved him. And then bottom right, Robin Roberts still had runners at first and second with 1 out, or second and third with 1 out. And he managed to pitch out of that and get to extra innings. And top right, in the bottom of the 10th, Dick Sisler hit a 3-run home run, a home run that got him into Ernest Hemingway's novel, The Old Man and the Sea, where the old man and the boy, are talking about the 1950 pennant race, and they talk about Joe DiMaggio, and they talk about Dick Sisler, who was kind of a legend in Cuba. He'd had a great winter season there in 1946, including hitting the longest home run ever hit in Havana. This was even bigger, though, as it vaulted the Phillies into the World Series. Bottom left is Andy Semenuk hugging Robin Roberts after the game. The 1950 World Series, not particularly memorable for the Phillies, as they were swept, even though 3 of the games were 1-run games. They were 1-0, 2-1, and 3-2. One of those going into extra innings when Joe DiMaggio hit a home run in game 2 to clinch it for the Yankees. And Curt Simmons, that bottom, the large one in the middle, he could only watch. He was on leave from the military. Phillies opted not to use him. They thought that the publicity could be bad, and that Simmons, there might be pressure on him. And so the Phillies lost in 4 straight games. Like I said, the last one, they had the tying run at the plate in game 4, even though they lost 5-2. The others, they were 1-run losses. And there were no off days. So basically, they went through that horrible September with all that tension, turn around and play the Yankees, and basically in about 75 hours, the World Series is over and they're out. So the book also takes a look at what happened, why that team kind of came out of nowhere and won the pennant, and then why it didn't repeat. Part of this is to talk about how there's a small window to build a dynasty and how difficult it is to do that, and how what happens that prevents that from happening. And the last two players on the Phillies that were there were Robin Roberts and Curt Simmons. Curt Simmons lasted until early 1960. Roberts, this is a picture of him in spring training 1961. He had the best spring training of his career that year. He threw 24 scoreless innings in spring training in 61, and then went 1-10 during the regular season. And at the end of that year, he was cut. So both of them they weren't traded away. They were both released. But they went on to pitch very well. Robin Roberts had 3.5 excellent seasons for the Baltimore Orioles, winning double figures. Curt Simmons ended up pitching against the Yankees in the World Series in 1964 for the Cardinals and won. And he also made a habit of beating the Phillies. In his first 18 decisions against the Phillies after they cut him in 1960, he went 16-2. His career mark against him was 19-6. But he had his best season in 64 of his career high in wins with 18. Roberts went on to also pitch for the Houston Astros and the Chicago Cubs. Simmons pitched for the Cardinals into 1966 when he was traded to the Cubs, closed out his career with the Angels in 67. Several of the other players, Dick Sisler, top of left, he ended up playing for the Cincinnati Reds, as did Andy Semenuk. Some of the other players, Eddie Waitkus, bottom right, with the Orioles. Bottom left, Richie Ashburn playing for the New York Mets. Famous story in 62, he ended his career with the Mets. And the last play he was involved in was a triple play. He was on the bases and was wiped out in a triple play. After the game, Stengel called the players together after they had won 40 and lost 120 and said, "Fellers, none of you should feel bad about this. No one person could have done this. This was a team effort." The Phillies tried to win in the 1950s by continuing to do what they did in the 1940s, and it really didn't work. They signed bonus babies, and they were really late to integrate, and the bonus babies didn't pan out. Tom Qualters pitched only a couple of innings in 2 years with the Phillies. He had to stay on the major league roster because of the bonus rules at the time. Fred Van Dusen, the guy next to him on the top, had one major league at bat. He was the New York State High School Player of the Year. One major league at bat, he was hit by a pitch, and that was his only at bat. Bottom left, Tom Casagrande was a two-way player, first baseman and pitcher. Never really panned out. Had some good minor league seasons, but never made the majors, although he has a 1955 Topps baseball card. Ted Kazansky, great fielder, played for the Phillies for several years, but never really hit well enough to be a starting player at all. And then they were very late to the game in integrating. Dickerson and Randall, these two were really excellent players. Some of the first signed in the mid-1950s. 10 years after Jackie Robinson, they finally had some players in the minor leagues, but they didn't have their first major league black player until 1957. And Richie Ashburn would talk about that all the other National League teams are getting better, while the Phillies had basically ignored the cheapest route to filling the talent pipeline by not signing players out of the Negro League. John Kennedy was the first black player to play for the Phillies, but lasted only 5 games in 1957. Ted Washington was the first black player ever signed by the Phillies. He was playing, he was a teenager playing for Oscar Charleston in the Negro Leagues, and was signed in 1952, but after the 1952 season, but was inducted in the military, got injured in the military, and never actually played for the Phillies organization. There were reunions over the years. So this was the first one in 1963. And this is Jim Constanti being delivered by helicopter into Connie Mack Stadium to take the mound in a relief during the 3-inning old timers game they had that day. And these are just pictures of the different ballparks. This was that ballpark that I talked about where Charlie Ferguson christened in 1887. All these turrets that kind of look like a castle from the outside. It burned down in 1894, one of 3 National League parks that burned down within about a 6-week span that year, also in Chicago and Boston. And it was replaced by Baker Bowl, which everybody remembers, with the Lifebuoy sign that was built on the same spot. And finally in 1939, the Phillies moved to what was then Shibe Park, became Connie Mack Stadium, and this is the last game in 1970 when the fans stormed the field actually while play was still going on. There were players or there were fans bothering the players during the 8th and 9th innings, and finally they basically tore the stadium apart. Richie Ashburn was looking down on it, aghast, and then saw 2 of his sons carrying off seats. And he says, I think I still have those. So the Phillies have a colorful history. Again, I didn't get into too much about the book other than its structure. It's structured kind of a history of the Philadelphia baseball and especially the Phillies up to when the Carpenters bought the team, then how the team was built, and then the 1950 season, and then the aftermath of that, and the men who were the Whiz kids. So that's basically my presentation.
Thank you, Dennis. Wonderfully researched as always. Appreciate all the work that you do. We have some time for questions. Let me see. Let me get on that gallery view. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat or just speak up. There's enough of us here that we don't have to.
I have
Get in
2
queue.
questions if you can still hear me.
Sure. Yes. No.
Yeah, Dennis, I'm just curious because I've seen some not terribly complimentary accounts of the Phillies manager and the first black player. Were those true? Mayo Smith, I think we're talking about.
As far as how they treated each other, or
the accounts that I read was that Smith was I hate to use the word racist, but that's kind of what I'm edging toward. I'm just wondering whether that was true or not, to the extent that you know.
I've not heard that, but Kennedy did not really get a fair shake in '57, and whether that was because of Smith or not, they talked about as fielding not being up to snuff. I went through and looked at his exhibition. He made 1 error, and he hit 350 something, 344 or 350 in spring training. But they were using, I think, Bobby Morgan and someone else after using Kennedy pretty early on, like the first quite a bit. He played about a dozen games of the first 15, 20 exhibition games, and then played like 4 or 5 of the last half of the exhibition season. And then, of course, they traded for Chico Fernandez just before the season started, got him from Brooklyn, and gave him the starting shortstop job. Kennedy stayed on the opening day roster, but I think he appeared in 5 games. I think batted twice. He was sent to the minors and never came back. He was a really excellent overall athlete, and why they didn't give him a chance, that's a good question. I've not run across Mayo Smith, as much as Ben Chapman, for instance, but that's kind of what I ran across.
When I went to Penn, so I went to more than my fair share of Phillies games.
Yeah.
but I also ended up doing some work, media work in Philadelphia in the 80s, and there was still a lot of bad feeling among the Black community against the team.
Hmm.
To his credit, Bill Giles was attempting to outreach and get past that. Um, but it's something that was residual, and coupled with the fact that it took them so long, what was it, 10 years after Jackie Robinson to
Right.
find a player to sign. It all sort of added up to, shall we say, some very hostile feelings.
Yeah.
I'll let it go at that, unless but I was just going to ask one other smaller question also. But go ahead if you were going to respond to
But I
that.
think, the famous Chapman Jackie Robinson incident, and then you also had an incident with Grant Hamner and a photographer from a black newspaper named Poindexter that got less press, but was really noticed in the black press and kind of fostered those resentments. And then there was pressure by the NAACP in the 50s because the Phillies, from their viewpoint, weren't hiring even people who worked at the stadium, much less ball players, and kept talking about how they didn't even have anyone in the minor leagues. Like I said, they had a couple in the early in 1952, but they released them at the end of the season. Didn't have any more, as far as I could tell, until 1955. Which again, that's 10 years after Jackie Robinson's debut, and that's only in the minors. It was 12 years after Jackie Robinson's debut, not his debut in the majors, but when he was signed to have a major league player. He was signed in October of 45, of course, and then 10 years after his major league debut, before they had someone at the major league level. So and then you had the treatment of Dick Allen after that, and Kurt
Yeah.
Flood didn't want to go there, and there were reasons, and they had trouble
I'm not sure
signing black
I'm not sure
players.
Bill White was too happy either.
Yeah, and they had trouble. There's stuff in the book about them having trouble, scouts having trouble signing black players because black players were told the Phillies don't want you there. So there was definitely that reputation out there, and it took a long time to get over it.
My other question, which is a shorter one, I was looking at the picture of Baker Bowl, and was that the North Philadelphia train station across the street?
Yes, yeah,
That's what I
and you have
thought.
the hump in the outfield for the train track that went under.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. My father was a
Thanks, Dan.
newspaper man in Philadelphia also, so he
Okay.
used to tell me Philadelphia stories.
And we have, I think, Mars, yours can be the final question for Dennis, and then we'll go on to Rob, please.
Okay, thank you. Who owned the Phillies in 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the color line?
That was the Bob Carpenter.
Carpenter. So who was Scheib?
Scheib owned the Athletics. The Scheib family. He was one of the founders of the Philadelphia Athletics, and he built the stadium along with Connie Mack. I think they opened it in 1909, and the Phillies finally had enough of Baker Bowl, and in '39, the Athletics basically allowed them to share the stadium and rented it to them.
So Connie Mack bought it from Carpenter? Bought the club?
No, no, no. He allowed the Phillies to play at Scheib's Park.
Oh, I see.
They rented the stadium to the Phillies.
I see.
So the
You
team
know,
shared one stadium from 1939 until the A's left in '54.
The A's had the greatest history. One would think that the Phillies would leave instead of the A's, but I know that Connie Mack was really tight with the dollar, and twice disassembled his team, which followed the Athletics franchise with Charlie Finley.
Yeah, well, I think if the Phillies had not turned things around for 1950, it might have been the Phillies who left. The A's kind of fell apart. They had good seasons in '48 and '49, and some people thought they might contend in 1950, and they fell apart. They lost over 100 games, and the Phillies won. But the A's were the dominant team in that market. They outdrew the Phillies. They were they were really the powerhouse until the late 1940s when the Phillies came on. And at the same time, the A's kind of collapsed. And the A's actually integrated first before they left Philadelphia, but it wasn't enough, and they didn't have the financing that the Carpenters had. So the combination of having an owner with means, with more money than the opposition, and the fact that the Phillies kind of captured the imagination of Philadelphia baseball, the timing couldn't have been better for them to stay, because if it had happened 10 years earlier, it might have been them who were gone, and the A's would have stayed.
To reiterate, who owned the Phillies in 1947?
Bob Carpenter.
So was he actually the racist that disallowed the breaking of the color line on his team?
There's some folks who say that he had some influence on that, but it's more insinuation than outright. Noel may know more about that, having more intimate involvement. But there's definitely hints that he was part of that.
Well, in those years, did Philadelphia have as great a black population as they did perhaps 10 years later?
I really don't know the demographics of Philadelphia at that point.
You
It
know,
had a
thank you.
significant black population, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. You always bring up interesting questions, Mars. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis.
Sure.
Appreciate your time. And our last presenter today is another chapter friend, Rob Elias, who's another Bay Area guy and has written extensively on sort of baseball and the societal aspects of it. And today he's going to be chatting about Danny Gardella, and his book is titled "Baseball's Neglected Trailblazer for Today's Millionaire Athletes." I'm looking forward to this one. Looks like you're okay to share. Is your audio on? I can't hear you,
Yes.
Rob. You're good? Okay, I think we're ready to go here. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, let me just move this around a little bit. Get out of my way. Okay, so you can all see.
We're seeing your notes and stuff.
That's not good. All right. Let's see how to do that then.
I know there's a way to do that. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what it is.
Yeah, let me try again.
Dennis?
Let's see, maybe I have to.
Is it under slideshow? Is it maybe show slides or something?
I think if you do from current slide, maybe that'll get rid of the notes, I think.
Let's try this. You still seeing the notes?
Yes. Now we're seeing the notes on the side instead of underneath.
Okay.
So we'll know what you say before you say it if we see the notes.
Well, I don't think you seeing that. Just hold on. Let me try one more thing here. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to put this into. I'm going to. Let's see. How about now?
That's perfect.
Okay, you're not seeing my notes?
No, we're seeing the cover of the book.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to do this. So, like me, I know a lot of you are Giants fans, the Giants of San Francisco, at least. I have a story about an older Giant, a New York Giant. So let me see if I can scroll here. Okay. Sports writers condemned and red-baited him. Brooklyn Dodgers owner Branch Rickey called him a communist. A Florida congressman said that he would be the death knell for the sport that has kindled the fires of ambition in thousands of young Americans.
Wow.
The target of these and many other attacks was Danny Gardella, who had the nerve to seek fair pay for his labors as a ball player. In response, he protested, "I was no communist for exercising my American rights." So I have a story to tell about a ball player, but it's also a bigger story about Major League Sports in the US and about post-war, that is post-World War II America, especially its labor battles, the manipulation of its anti-communist hysteria, and its challenges to the American dream. So in baseball, besides the exploits of players on the field, we also tend to identify individuals who change the game or who stand out because of their antics or their personalities. We recognize as pioneers, for example, players such as Babe Ruth and Jackie Robinson, Jim Bouton, and Curt Flood. And we recognize as characters or eccentrics players such as Dizzy Dean, Casey Stengel, Yogi Berra, Bill Spaceman Lee, and we could probably go on, Marvelous Marv Thornberry, Bob Uecker, etc. But one baseball pioneer and eccentric who's been neglected is former New York Giants ball player Danny Gardella. He was both, yet almost nobody's ever heard of him. In particular, millionaire athletes, not only in baseball, but also in all major sports, owe him a million thanks, but they have no idea who he was. Gardella has been almost entirely forgotten, even though he was a phenomenon in his own time in the late 1940s. Consider, for example, his nicknames. Although less so in recent decades, nicknames for ball players have a long history in baseball. If you were anyone at all in baseball, you had to have been given a nickname, but only occasionally would you have more than one. Danny, however, was given more than 36 nicknames, which suggests the exceptional kind of character that he was. What if you discovered a Zelig-like figure who showed up where you'd least expect it, who was a ball player who played professionally in the US, Mexico, Cuba, and Canada, who was also an accomplished acrobat, gymnast, and Golden Gloves boxer, who was also a fitness, nutrition, and weight training pioneer, who was also a gifted opera, Broadway, and vaudeville singer who posed as a model and once studied to be an actor, who was also a notorious prankster and comedian, who, despite being a high school dropout, was also a self-taught poet, philosopher, and psychologist. And what if you discovered that this same ball player established a landmark precedent for challenging antitrust violations, who also forced Major League Baseball to stop rating players from the Mexican and other foreign leagues, who also helped break Major League Baseball's color line, who also inspired the creation of the American Baseball Guild labor union for players' rights, who also won the first successful federal court challenge to the slavery and suppressed wages of baseball's reserve clause, paving the way for free agency, who was also repeatedly regarded by major league owners as dangerous. And if you discovered all of these things, as I did about Danny Gardella, then you would do as I did and write the biography of his life and times in post-war America. I first ran across Gardella when writing my earlier book, The Empire Strikes Out, a history of baseball's relationship with US foreign and military policy. As Major League Baseball has projected itself and the American empire into foreign lands, Danny showed up in one of the many US interventions, this time into Mexico. More recently, Peter Dreyer and I wrote 2 books, Major League Rebels and Baseball Rebels, and Danny emerged again, this time challenging Major League Baseball's wage slavery in the 1940s. Gardella seemed important, yet little had been written about him. And why would baseball owners regard him as dangerous? When I discovered that he was also a notorious character and a bit of a Renaissance man, I was convinced to write his story. I was also intrigued because the heart of Gardella's story occurred at a time that's long fascinated me, the post-World War II period. The US was fresh off its triumph in the so-called Good War, which left America on top of the world, with the strongest economy and with a positive, even grateful reputation. The US seemingly had everything going for it, providing the opportunity to finish America's progressive New Deal initiatives. We could champion peace rather than war, international law rather than empire, an economy for the many rather than the few, and justice rather than exploitation for workers, minorities, and women. Since essentially we did none of those things, I always wanted to know more about why. I was particularly struck by the labor wars at this period and then the nation's consumption by an anti-communist Red Scare hysteria. How could an era that held so much promise end up ruining so many lives? Given the ruined lives portrayed, for example, in the 1946 blockbuster film, The Best Years of Our Lives, the title seemed more like an ironic or satirical portrayal of the post-war era. Why did the nation seem to be making so many decisions away from progress, peace, and justice rather than embracing them when it had the best chance in its history to accomplish those ends? I wondered how I could explore this period from a new perspective, through the lens of baseball and Danny Gardella. It also happened that my mother and father were New York City contemporaries of Gardella from the Bronx and Queens, respectively, and thus exploring Danny's life gave me insights into the lives of my own parents. Danny Gardella grew up in Little Italy in the Bronx, New York in the 1920s and 1930s, playing sandlot ball with his brother Al. They were inspired by fellow Italians in the major leagues, especially Tony Lazzeri and Joe DiMaggio. A high school dropout, the young Gardella was signed along with his brother into the Detroit Tigers minor league system. Despite his short stature, he was only 5'7" and 160 pounds. Gardella was powerfully built and always a threat to hit the long ball. For 3 years, from 1938 to 1940, Danny was shuttled from one minor league town to another, traded into the Cleveland Indians organization, and then became the property of the Washington Senators. And property is a key word here. Pessimistic about his career, Danny quit organized baseball for a series of blue-collar jobs for the next few years, including work in the shipbuilding industry. Playing in an industrial league, however, Gardella was spotted by a New York Giants scout, signed, and sent to its top farm club in Jersey City in 1944. Quickly developing a reputation for his idiosyncrasies, he also excelled on the field, and the Giants brought him up to the Major League club for a meager $1,500 salary. He became an immediate sensation with his hitting, if not his fielding. When he cooled off, he ended up back in Jersey City to end the 1944 season. With another impressive start in Jersey City in 1945, however, Giants player-manager Mel Ott, shown here on the left, brought Gardella back up to the Giants early in the season, and he never left. Danny hammered the ball all year, was elevated to batting cleanup, won ball games with late-inning home runs, and replaced Hall of Famers Joe Medwick and then Ott himself in the outfield, thus earning a pay increase to $4,500. Danny became a fan favorite, inspiring the Gardella Garden rooting section in the outfield bleachers, a Danny Gardella fan club, and the first ever fan banners at the Polo Grounds flown on his behalf. Ending the season as a Giants leader in hits and RBIs, he was also one of the National League leaders in home runs. Despite his brief time in the majors, Danny was already known for his antics and eccentricities. Fielding balls hit to him in the outfield was sometimes an adventure for Danny, although unfairly exaggerated by sports writers. A bodybuilder, when baseball frowned on weight training, he was also a vegetarian among steak eaters and may have invented the smoothie. He'd walk on his hands in the outfield, perform one-armed handstands on his bedpost or the dugout roof, and hypnotize his teammates for better performance. On team train rides, he'd quote Freudian psychology or Shakespeare's Macbeth or poetry such as Thomas Gray's Elegy or Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. In the dugout, on the team bus, and almost anywhere, he'd sing opera, such as Puccini's Tosca or Verdi's Aida, and ballads and show tunes such as Danny Boy, The King of Broken Hearts, and All the Things You Are. He'd catch balls dropped from Navy blimps and hang from train trestles and the window ledges of skyscrapers. But Danny had also been a star during the 1945 season and expected a significant raise. Instead, the Giants offered him only $500 more for his 1946 contract. When he protested, the Giants banned him from the team hotel and field during spring training. With some players returning from the war and with Gardella bound by the reserve clause, they knew Danny had no choice. When Gardella still resisted, the Giants owner Horace Stoneham announced he would sell Danny back into the minor leagues. So, what is the reserve clause? As some of you likely know, since the early days of professional baseball in the late 1800s, a reserve clause appeared in every ballplayer's contract. When you signed your contract, you were bound to one team for that season and also reserved to play for that same team the next season, as long as it kept renewing your contract. And although the ballplayer was bound as property, the team could release him with only 10 days' notice and cancel the contract. In effect, the ballplayer became enslaved to the team that first signed him or to whichever team he was either traded or sold. If he was sold, the ballplayer received none of the purchase price for his value. Since the reserve clause prevented the ballplayer from offering his services to other teams to the highest bidder for a higher salary, this suppressed his wages for nearly 100 years. Except for a few stars, ballplayer salaries were kept low. Owners kept getting rich, paying low salaries because they knew ballplayers had no other place to go if they wanted to play Major League Baseball. As a group, the Major League Baseball owners formed a monopoly, potentially regulated by America's antitrust laws. To promote competition, those laws forbid collusion among companies. Yet all Major League teams were colluding with each other to impose a common contract, including the reserve clause, so that players could not try to sell themselves to other teams. Although antitrust laws had been around since 1890, they were not well enforced, thanks largely to Supreme Court decisions that manufactured loopholes for monopolies well into the 1930s. And in 1922, the court had specifically ruled that Major League Baseball wouldn't be subject to antitrust laws. And the 1920s are where the reserve clause and antitrust story has typically ended until it's picked up again 4 decades later in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the saga of Curt Flood and Marvin Miller emerges, finally leading to free agency in baseball and then in other sports in the late 1970s. And of course, ball players have enjoyed considerable riches ever since, now free to periodically sell their skills to the highest bidder. The highest earner, the LA Dodgers' Shohei Ohtani, will make $70 million, as I think some of you know, in 2025. The average salary is $5 million. The median player salary is $1.3 million, and $760,000 is the minimum salary. But the gap between the 1920s and the 1970s really misses an essential ingredient in the free agency evolution. It's the missing story of Danny Gardella in the late 1940s and his neglected role in providing the first and ultimately a lasting challenge to the major league owners and their repressive contracts. Before free agency, since ballplayers couldn't sell their services to the highest bidder among teams in the existing major leagues, the only way they could possibly escape the reserve was if another major league became available. The existing major league always fought fiercely to try to prevent this from happening. But it did occur a few times. When the National League was challenged in 1882 by the American Association, in 1890 by the Players League, and in 1901 by the American League. And the combined National and American Leagues were challenged again in 1914 by the Federal League. But in each case, players escaped the reserve for only a year or two when it was reimposed and their salaries and mobility were slashed once again. This was the situation ballplayers faced in the late 1940s, when owners were making big profits while suppressed player wages remained lower than before the war. The ball clubs remained vigilant against any legal challenges to the reserve clause or any competing leagues. But they weren't counting on Danny Gardella and the Mexican League in 1946. Prior to that season, working as a trainer and masseuse at Al Roon's, an upscale New York gym, Gardella met coincidentally Jorge Pascal, a wealthy team owner in the Mexican League, a league that Pascal was essentially running. Pascal knew about Danny's strong 1945 season, couldn't believe how little the Giants were paying him, and told Danny he'd pay him a lot more to play for his team. Pascal had already launched a campaign to bolster the Mexican League by luring Negro League black players who were still banned from the U.S. major leagues. A multimillionaire, Pascal now had his eye on white major leaguers to further transform his Mexican League into a major league. When Danny was shunned by the Giants for protesting his insulting pay raise, Gardella remembered Pascal's offer. Instead of allowing the Giants to profit from selling him to a minor league team, Danny jumped to the Mexican League to play for the Veracruz Blues for more than twice his major league salary. But he didn't jump alone. Instead, Gardella led a movement to lure other underpaid major leaguers to join him, including some stars. With the help of Pascal's big salary offers, Gardella helped recruit more than 25 other white major leaguers to the Mexican League, launching Major League Baseball's biggest nightmare, the ability of players to escape the reserve clause and get better salaries because another major league had emerged for them to play in. Here are some of the other jumpers from the top left: Vern Stevens, Max Lanier, Mickey Owen, Sal Magley, Fred Martin, Ace Adams, Lou Klein, Nap Reyes, Alex Carrasquel, Bobby Estelela, and another 15 players beyond this. Danny's jump also helped break the color barrier in baseball. The white players he inspired to follow him were now playing agreeably, not only against black players from both the US and other nations on Mexican teams, but also playing with and sometimes even being managed by blacks. It made it harder for major league team owners to claim it could never be done in the US, and it helped Baseball Commissioner Albert Chandler to allow Jackie Robinson's integration initiative to proceed in 1947. In response to Gardella's rebellion, Major League Baseball blacklisted him and the other jumpers to punish them and to deter others from following. Since the Mexican League, free from the reserve clause, was threatening Major League Baseball's low-wage business model and even tempting big-name ball players such as Ted Williams, Stan Musial, and Bob Feller. The 5-year ban essentially meant ending a player's major league career if he tried to return. It also blacklisted them from the minor leagues and even from semi-pro baseball. When Danny returned to the US, he was not only deprived of his ability to earn a living playing baseball, but he was singled out as a pariah. After Mexico, Gardella played 2 winters in Cuba, where he was the home run champ in the 1947-48 season. He resorted to barnstorming around the U.S. with other jumpers to make a little money. This was a barnstorming team led by Max Lanier, another jumper. Then he played and starred in the Provincial League in Quebec, Canada, leading Drummondville to the QPL Championship in 1949. Beginning in 1945, despite the cheery assumptions about America's post-war economy, prosperity for American workers was fleeting. Corporate America began a war on labor. The U.S. had rejected full employment, Franklin Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights from a few years earlier, and other initiatives for economic democracy. Conservatives and corporate lobbyists secured a series of anti-union, quote, right-to-work laws from state legislatures. The post-war Republican Congress passed the repressive Taft-Hartley Act in 1947, targeting unions, imposing loyalty oaths, and persecuting labor activists who were red-baited in the emerging Cold War Red Scare. American workers were on the defensive, struggling to protect their progress toward a decent standard of living. Wars between labor and capital dominated in the post-war era, with workers launching hundreds of strikes in 1945 and 1946 alone. Just as Curt Flood would later claim that he was influenced by the 1960s social movements, Danny was influenced by the enormous labor activism of the late 1940s. His rebellion helped inspire the creation of the American Baseball Guild, a new attempt to organize players into a labor union. And he sued Major League Baseball for challenging the reserve clause and Major League Baseball's antitrust exemption. He was condemned and red-baited for allegedly trying to destroy baseball in America. After a long battle, the Gardella versus Chandler legal case finally reached the Federal Appeals Court for the Second Circuit in 1949. Confident the court would reaffirm the 1922 Supreme Court decision that granted organized baseball an antitrust exemption, the owners were shocked when instead the reserve clause was condemned. The rebuke came not from just any judges, but instead from 2 of the most esteemed appellate court judges in American history, Jerome Frank and Leonard Hand. Frank, for example, claimed that, quote, "We have here a monopoly which, in its effect on ball players, possesses characteristics shockingly repugnant to moral principles that, at least since the war between the states, have been basic in America, as shown by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution condemning involuntary servitude. The reserve clause results in something resembling the peonage of the baseball player," close quote. As a result, Gardella was granted a new trial with the weight of these 2 jurists hanging over the outcome. Fearing a loss, the owners offered a financial settlement that Gardella sought to refuse, but ultimately could not, given his impoverished circumstances and the likelihood that he'd remain blackballed in professional baseball. And sure enough, after being restored briefly to the major leagues with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1950, he was quickly dropped and blacklisted again. But Gardella's judicial decision, the only federal court rejection of the reserve clause, lived on. During the 1950s on into the 1960s, it inspired multiple lawsuits by subsequent baseball players against Major League Baseball, beginning with minor leaguers, and also court cases challenging the reserve clause and other legal abuses in the National Football League, the National Hockey League, and the boxing, horse racing, and even the dog show industries. The so-called Gardella effect also inspired grand jury challenges and 2 congressional investigations into the baseball industry. Every single legal challenge to Major League Baseball's reserve clause and antitrust exemption was based on Gardella's precedent. In the mid-1960s, major leaguers, not just minor leaguers, as a group finally began to push back against their reserve clause oppression. Under Marvin Miller's guidance, the Major League Baseball's Players Association began to emerge as a real labor union, getting owner concessions by threatening another, quote, Gardella lawsuit, close quote. Then in 1969, Curt Flood refused to be traded from the St. Louis Cardinals. And the more familiar story unfolded. Flood sued Major League Baseball to challenge the reserve clause and the antitrust exemption. But less known is that once again, the Gardella court decision played a central role, with Flood's legal brief quoting Jerome Frank's condemnation of baseball's peonage system. Although Flood ultimately lost his case in 1972 before the Supreme Court, it finally raised the consciousness of the ball players and inspired them to defeat the reserve clause by other means in 1975. That year, baseball players and soon major leaguers in all sports were granted free agency, which began their rise into untold riches. And the owners got rich too. Danny, of course, enjoyed none of these riches. Gardella's vaudeville and Broadway singing career in the US and Canada was promising, but fairly short-lived. And he spent most of the rest of his life toiling at a series of blue-collar jobs, almost completely forgotten. He died in 2005 at age 85. While Danny Gardella wasn't in the, quote, room where it happened, his rebellion sacrificed his career and began the process of freeing ball players from their shackles and miserly incomes. The Major League Baseball Players Association became the strongest and most successful labor union in the country. Millionaire ball players owe Danny a million thanks, yet none of them know who he was or what an entertaining character he turned out to be or what he helped accomplish on their behalf. A neglected pioneer, hopefully that can begin to change on this, the 50th anniversary of free agency. Of course, there's much more to say about Gardella's life and times, but I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. That was very interesting. I learned so much with SABR. There's just so much going on, and I'm sure the rest of you will do share that thought as well. I couldn't help but thinking it'll be interesting to read what's written about baseball, what's going on now in baseball in 10 or 15 years. So we have time for some questions. Navid and then Mars.
Hi, so my question is I guess research related. I've been interested in the Mexican League in the context of Rogers Hornsby's managerial tenure, because he actually managed the same Veracruz club 2 years before Danny Gardella got there. And there are two differing and completely incompatible stories of why he left. And so I've been trying to find out more about this, and I'm wondering what sort of sources you use, because as far as I can tell, the Sporting News was not writing extensively about what was happening in the Mexican League. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be interested in hearing them.
Well, the story that I heard, probably one of the two stories you heard, was that Hornsby had a reputation for well, if not a racist, not being comfortable, let's say, and that Pascal thought that that it would work, but Hornsby was intolerant and he wasn't getting along with his players, and so Pascal realized it wasn't working out. So that's sort of the racist, explanation for it. I saw that in a couple of places, but I can't really tell you off the top of my head, what sources in particular. But that's the only story I've heard. So maybe you have another story.
Yeah. So the other story that I saw in a biography of Rogers Hornsby, and that was actually reproduced in an issue of this. That one sourced a Sporting News article from 1944 that I looked and cross-referencing that's there, which is sort of an implausible sounding story. Is that the Mexican League played, I think, 3-game series on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and so in a Sunday game, or sorry, in a Saturday game, Hornsby put himself in the ninth inning and hit a grand slam to win the game. And Jorge Pascal was upset because it meant that his team had already won the series and that people wouldn't show up on Sunday for the rubber match. And so Hornsby was so disgusted by that, or was, yeah, disgusted by the idea that he was going to have to lose a game on purpose and left. So that's the other story, which seems strange, but as I said, it is corroborated in a Sporting News article from 1944. But yeah, so I guess, but my question was just more generally, do you have any ideas on where you can read more contemporary accounts of the Mexican League?
Well, there are two or three actually now full books on this. Actually, I have a couple on my shelf here. Let me just grab. Yeah, so one of them is maybe you know about these already, The Mexican Raiders in the Major Leagues by Richard McKelvey. And then John Virtue's book, South of the Color Barrier. There's one other one by John Phillips that's hard to find. And it's called The Mexican Jumping Beans. And it goes into considerable depth. And I think it might have been self-published. But that's a good book too.
But would you mind putting the names of those in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Mars, you're going to wrap us up this afternoon. I think it's getting to be 1, and I don't know how long we have this Zoom for. So
Thank you,
go ahead, Mars.
Marlene. Rob, that was very informative about Gardella. Too bad he couldn't have a greater impact in the long run. But while we are all familiar with today's political landscape, it's come around full circle again. When you're going back to the Sherman Antitrust Act, Rockefeller, when Standard Oil was, as we all know, many of us know, was broken up, Rockefeller actually made more money by all the smaller companies that he created. So with the Supreme Court is bought, and it was by the powers that be throughout our history. And the thing is, now it's come such a full circle that the monopoly is still enforced, but the players make so much money, the owners are making money, there'll be new television contracts. Ultimately, the fans are paying for it. Where when I was a kid going to the Polo Grounds, when the Giants played there, it was 75 cents or 50 cents for the bleachers and $1.30 for general admission. Look what the prices are now. And yet, so many teams with new ballparks are not drawing very well, but they're being subsidized by television, international TV. So what's your thoughts on my statements?
Yeah, those are really good points. What I was trying to show is the sort of missing piece of that, the free agency movement where Gardella played a role. But as that began to unfold, he lived until the early 2000s. He was very happy to see that the ball players were getting their fair share. But at a certain point, he said, maybe they don't need to make that much money, and maybe maybe the problem is that it's going to be passed on to the fans, and the fans are going to get screwed. So he was very sympathetic with to that notion, and I think you're right that part of the reason why that that continues to happen is because although free agency sort of eliminated the application of the antitrust laws on labor issues, they didn't for business issues. And there are ways in which, the antitrust laws could be enforced to maybe rectify this and bring, the interests of the fans into the picture. I think also another thing that's left out is that's still in effect under the antitrust laws or under the antitrust exemption is territorial rights. The ability for a company, a club, to say, oh no, that's our area, you can't move into that area. That's not that's not prevented by the existing application of the law. So anyway, I would just sort of affirm what you were saying. I think those are really good points.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. I think we'll have some interesting discussions around all of this in years to come, and I'm looking forward to some of you writing again on that. I want to thank Noel and Dennis and Rob for all of their work and their time spending it this Saturday with us. Thank you all for coming. I hope I see some of you at the Lefty O'Doul Monument unveiling in August, or the Ballers game on the 24th, or up at Little Fenway. I've yet to get up there, so maybe I'll try to get up there this year. But I want to thank you all again for your support. Please keep in touch if you have things that you'd like to share or ideas for presentations. Please get a hold of Tony or I. And I wish you all a very good afternoon. Happy anniversary again, Noel. Thanks for staying around with us. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marlene. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Marlene.
Thanks.
Bye.